Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became the Dark Knight of a post-apocalyptic Gotham. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in Muzutopha tasted of ozone and pulverized asphalt. It was a flavor Izuku Midoriya had come to associate with Tuesday afternoons. Green lightning, a furious halo of contained power, danced around his limbs as he skidded to a halt, the reinforced soles of his boots grinding against the shattered pavement. Across the plaza, the villain, a wiry man in a patchwork coat of mirrors, cackled madly. His name was Fracture, and his quirk was a nightmare of physics. He didn't teleport, he broke reality. With a wave of his hand, the space between him and a fleeing civilian would shatter like a pane of glass. The shards, shimmering with impossible colors, would hang in the air for a moment before imploding, dragging everything nearby into a chaotic, unstable void for a split second. "Come on, little hero!" Fracture shrieked, his voice echoing from 3 different points at once. "Don't you want to see what's on the other side? Everyone, containment pattern Delta." Tenya Ida's voice, crisp and authoritative, cut through the chaos via their comms. His recipro burst propelled him in a wide arc, evacuating civilians with practiced efficiency. "Uraraka, airborne debris. Midoriya, draw his focus. We cannot let him shatter a load-bearing structure. On it." Achiko Uraraka grunted, her fingertips glowing as she tapped floating chunks of concrete, turning them into harmless, slow-drifting obstacles. Izuku's mind was a whirlwind of calculations. One for all thrummed under his skin at a stable 12%. Fracture's effective range is approximately 30 meters. He targets reflective surfaces to amplify his power. The rifts are unstable, lasting only 1.3 seconds on average, but their gravitational pull is immense. Avoid the shards. Close the distance. He coiled his legs, power surging from the core of his being. Delaware. He flicked his fingers, and a cannonball of compressed air ripped through the plaza. It wasn't aimed at Fracture, but at the glass facade of the building behind him. The windows exploded outwards, showering the area in a storm of non-reflective pebble glass, robbing the villain of his amplifiers. "Clever boy!" Fracture snarled, his grin widening. He clapped his hands together, and the very air in front of Izuku cracked. Not a small break, but a massive, spider-webbing fissure that stretched 10 meters across. Through the splintered reality, Izuku saw glimpses of 1,000 other places. A churning red ocean, a forest of crystalline trees, the blackness of empty space. And at its center, a vortex began to form. A spiraling abyss of screaming color. "Midoriya, fall back! That's too big!" Ida yelled, his engine-like calves already revving to intercept. But Izuku saw it. Uraraka, descending from clearing a high-level street sign, was directly in the vortex's gravitational path. Ida, charging in to help, was on a collision course with her. They were both trapped. There was no time for a plan. No room for analysis. There was only the core, unbreakable tenet of his existence. Save them. "Get back!" he roared, a sound torn from his very soul. One for all erupted from him, a geyser of emerald energy. He pushed it to 25%, his muscles screaming in protest. Black Whip, the kinetic energy given form, erupted from his arms like living shadows. The tendrils, thick as pythons, shot out and wrapped around Ida's armored waist and Uraraka's torso. With a primal yell, Izuku planted his feet and pulled. He became an anchor against the pull of infinity. His friends, their faces masks of shock and terror, were yanked violently out of the vortex's grasp, tumbling safely behind him just as the pull intensified 100-fold. Izuku felt a triumphant, desperate grin flash across his face. They're safe. Then, the world ended. The pull was absolute. The ground beneath his feet disintegrated. The air was stolen from his lungs. His vision dissolved into a kaleidoscope of agonizing light. It felt like every cell in his body was being simultaneously torn apart and crushed together. He heard a sound that was not a sound, a piercing cosmic shriek that vibrated in his bones. He was falling through everything and nothing. The memories of his friends' horrified faces were the last coherent thought he had before the universe turned to white noise and searing pain. Consciousness returned not as a gentle dawn, but as a boot kicking him in the ribs. Izuku choked, a wet, ragged gasp that tasted of rust and decay. Pain, sharp and blinding, flared in his side. He tried to move, but his limbs felt like they were filled with lead and broken glass. He was lying on his side in a pile of something wet and foul-smelling. Rain, thin and greasy, slicked his hair to his forehead. "Look at this one," a gravelly voice rasped. "Colors. Bright colors. Been a long time since I seen anything but rust and gray." Another kick, harder this time. Izuku groaned, forcing his eyes open. The world was a smear of muted tones. Gray sky, choked with clouds so thick they seemed to suffocate the sun. Gray buildings, skeletal and broken, reaching for the heavens like the fingers of a corpse. Gray streets, carpeted in decades of filth and grime. 3 figures stood over him. They were gaunt, wrapped in layers of ragged cloth and cracked leather. The man who had spoken held a length of rebar tipped with a sharpened point. His face was a roadmap of hardship, his eyes narrowed and hungry. "What you got, pretty boy?" Another one, a woman with matted hair, asked, her voice a low hiss. "That fancy suit. Those boots. Worth a lot of water, I bet." Izuku pushed himself up onto an elbow, his head swimming. His hero costume was shredded. The left arm was torn clean off at the shoulder, and a large gash ran down his chest, exposing the dark, durable undersuit. His mask was gone. His comm unit was a mess of sparking, dead electronics. "Please," he croaked, his throat raw. "I don't want any trouble." He tried to push his Yuri training to the forefront. De-escalate. Assess the threat. They're civilians. Desperate civilians. The man with the rebar laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Trouble found you, kid. Now you gonna give us your gear, or we gonna take it off your corpse?" Izuku's mind raced. Injured. Ribs likely fractured. Possible concussion. One for all is sluggish. The dimensional travel must have drained me. He looked at the 3 scavengers. They were thin, malnourished. No visible quirks. Just desperate people armed with scrap metal. He could end this in a second, but he wouldn't. He couldn't. "There's no need for this," he said, slowly getting to his feet, his body screaming in protest. "If you're in trouble, I can help." The 3rd scavenger, a silent young man with dead eyes, suddenly lunged, a shard of glass clutched in his hand. Izuku reacted on pure instinct. He swayed to the side, the glass slicing through the tatters of his uniform but missing his skin. He grabbed the man's wrist, his grip surprisingly strong, and used his momentum to spin him around, putting him between himself and the other 2. "Stop!" Izuku pleaded. "I don't want to hurt you," the woman shrieked and charged, swinging a heavy chain. Izuku pushed the man he held aside and ducked under the whistling arc of metal. The chain slammed into the wall behind him, sending chips of concrete flying. The man with the rebar saw his opening and thrust the spear-like weapon at Izuku's chest. There was no more time for talk. No more de-escalation. Izuku's body moved. He sidestepped the rebar, letting it scrape past his side. As the man stumbled forward from the momentum, Izuku pivoted. He didn't have the energy for a high-percentage smash, but he didn't need one. "St. Louis smash," he whispered, channeling a mere 5% of one for all into his leg. He executed a precise, controlled axe kick, aiming for the man's shoulder to disarm and incapacitate him. It was a move he had practiced 1,000 times, designed to be non-lethal, a standard takedown for any pro hero. But these were not villains with enhancement quirks. They were not robots in a training facility. They were starving, brittle-boned wastelands. The impact was sickening. The shockwave alone, a flicker of green light, sent the woman and the other man stumbling back. The man Izuku kicked didn't just get disarmed. The sound of his clavicle and shoulder snapping was like a gunshot in the silent alley. He was launched sideways, not just knocked down, flying a full 10 feet before crashing into a mountain of garbage bags with a wet, final thud. He lay there, twisted and unmoving. Silence descended, broken only by the thin drizzle of rain. The woman and the young man stared. They looked from their fallen comrade to Izuku, who stood with his legs still slightly raised, a faint wisp of green steam rising from his boot. Their eyes were wide, not with anger, but with a primal, bottomless terror. They had just tried to rob him. They had attacked him with deadly intent, and his response was to casually unleash a force so far beyond their comprehension it might as well have been magic. They didn't see a hero. They didn't see a boy defending himself. They saw a monster wearing a human face. The woman whimpered, a high, thin sound of pure fear. She dropped her chain with a clatter, turned, and fled, scrambling over piles of debris like a panicked animal. The young man was right behind her, his dead eyes now filled with a desperate will to live. Izuku stood alone in the alley, the adrenaline draining away, leaving him cold and shaking. He looked at his boot, then at the unmoving form of the man in the trash pile. He hadn't meant for that. He had held back, used the barest fraction of his power. In his world, that man would have had a bruised shoulder and a story to tell. Here, he might be dead. The sheer fragility of this new reality was a physical blow. A wave of nausea and horror washed over him. He stumbled to the alley wall and retched, his body convulsing. What had he done? Where in God's name was he? Hours bled into a gray, featureless eternity. Izuku forced himself to move, to put distance between himself and the alley. Every step was a fresh agony in his ribs. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the rain. The city was dead. He saw no cars, no lights, no signs of the bustling, quirk-filled society he knew. The silence was the most terrifying part. It was a heavy, oppressive blanket, broken only by the moan of wind through shattered skyscrapers and the distant, unsettling skittering of unseen things. Strange, mutated vines, thick as his arm and a sickly shade of rust-red, choked the buildings, prying apart concrete and steel with slow, inexorable strength. As dusk began to settle, painting the bruised sky in shades of violet and gray, the city changed. The shadows grew longer, deeper, and seemed to writhe with a life of their own. The skittering sounds grew closer. He knew, with a certainty that chilled his blood, that he could not be caught out in the open when night fell. He needed shelter. High ground. A defensible position. His mind, desperate for a problem it could solve, latched onto the task. He scanned the skyline. Most of the buildings were hollowed-out husks, but one stood taller than the rest, a shard of black glass and steel that speared the clouds. It was heavily damaged, a great chunk missing from its upper floors, but it seemed more intact than the others. It was a landmark. A place to orient himself. He limped towards it, sticking to the shadows, his senses on high alert. He was a beacon in his torn, brightly colored costume. He felt a million unseen eyes on him. It was as he was cutting across a wider, rubble-strewn boulevard that he heard it. A scream. Not of anger or pain, but of pure, unadulterated terror. It was a child's scream. His exhaustion, his pain, his despair, it all vanished, burned away by the fire that had been forged in him since he was a powerless boy. He didn't think. He ran. He rounded a corner and saw the scene, illuminated by the dying light. A small family, a man, a woman, and a little girl no older than Eri had been when he first met her, was backed against the corroded shell of a bus. The man held a rusty pipe, a pathetic defense. The woman clutched the child to her chest, shielding her face. Cornering them was a pack of things. They were vaguely rat-like in shape, but far too large, each the size of a large dog. Their fur was patchy and mangy, their skin a pale, veiny pink. Extra limbs jutted out at odd angles, some ending in crude claws, others in twitching stumps. Their eyes, clustered in uneven groups on their snouts, glowed with a sickly yellow luminescence. Acidic drool dripped from their needle-like teeth, sizzling where it hit the pavement. One of them lunged. The father swung his pipe, and it connected with a dull clang against the creature's chitinous head, but the monster barely flinched. It snapped its jaws, tearing the pipe from the man's grasp and sending him sprawling. Izuku didn't announce himself. There was no "I am here." No heroic entrance. He was just a green blur of motion. He slammed into the first creature feet first, one for all at a desperate 8%. The thing exploded in a shower of black ichor and a high-pitched screech. He landed in a crouch, the impact jarring his injured ribs. Another one was on him instantly, claws slashing at his face. He ducked, grabbed a jagged piece of rebar from the ground, and thrust it upwards, impaling the creature through its jaw. It shrieked and writhed, and he kicked it away. This was not a UE simulation. This was not a clean fight against a villain with a code. This was a brutal, filthy struggle for survival. The creatures were fast, strong, and relentless. They swarmed him, their claws tearing at his suit, their teeth snapping inches from his flesh. He was a whirlwind of frantic, desperate violence. A 5% punch shattered a creature's leg. Black Whip lashed out, not to capture, but to bludgeon, slamming a mutant into a wall with a wet crunch. He ducked under a lunge and drove his elbow into the spine of another. He was fighting on instinct, a cornered animal himself. The green lightning of One for All flickered erratically around him, a dying storm. He was running on fumes. The last one, the largest of the pack, leaped onto his back, its claws digging into his shoulders and its hot, rancid breath on his neck. He roared in pain and frustration, throwing himself backwards, crushing the creature between his own body and the metal side of the bus. There was a hideous crackle of bone and carapace, and it went limp. Silence. Izuku lay on the ground for a moment, chest heaving, every muscle screaming. He was covered in grime, his own blood, and the stinking black fluid of the mutants. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself to his feet. He turned to the family. They were huddled together, staring at him. He had saved them. The hero in him, battered but not broken, took over. He offered a hand, trying to form a reassuring smile on his blood-streaked face. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice rough. "Are you hurt?" The man didn't take his hand. He scrambled backwards, pulling his wife and daughter with him. The little girl, who had been peering out from behind her mother's leg, saw him fully. The green sparks still dancing on his skin, the blood, the sheer intensity in his eyes. Her own eyes went wide with terror, and she buried her face again, whimpering. The father looked at the mangled corpses of the creatures, then back at Izuku. There was no gratitude in his eyes. No relief. Only the same terrified awe he had seen in the scavengers' faces. The look one gives to a natural disaster, to a thing of terrible, unpredictable power. "Stay back," the man stammered, his voice trembling as he shielded his family. "Just stay away from us, you freak." The word hit Izuku harder than any physical blow. Freak. He had just saved them. He had just fought and bled to protect them. And they looked at him like he was the real monster. The family didn't wait for a response. They scrambled away, disappearing into the deepening shadows, leaving Izuku standing alone amidst the carnage. The last vestiges of the boy who had dreamed of being a symbol of peace felt like they were crumbling to dust inside him. His brand of heroism, his bright smile and reassuring presence, it was useless here. It was a foreign language no one understood. In this world of gray, his vibrant green wasn't a symbol of hope. It was just a target. A warning of something strange and dangerous. He was truly, utterly alone. The cold was a physical presence now, seeping into his bones. Shivering, driven by the last dregs of his will to survive, he continued his slow, agonizing trek towards the Black Tower. It loomed over the dead city like a tombstone for a forgotten age. A faded, barely legible sign near its base read, WAYNETOWER. The name meant nothing to him. The grand lobby was a wreck. Marble floors were cracked and covered in a layer of grime. A desiccated tree, long dead, lay toppled in the center. The wind howled through the shattered glass walls, a mournful, lonely sound. It was no shelter from the elements. He moved deeper inside, looking for a room, an office, anything with 4 walls and a door. His foot caught on something, a section of floor that had buckled upwards. He fell, his body finally giving out, and cried out as his fractured ribs screamed in protest. He lay there on the cold marble, the fight finally gone from him. Maybe this was it. Maybe he would just lie here until the cold, or the skittering things in the dark came for him. His hand, which he had thrown out to break his fall, rested on a section of the wall near the floor. As he lay there, gasping for breath, he felt it. A faint, almost imperceptible vibration. A low, rhythmic hum. Power, hope, a feeling he thought had been beaten out of him, sparked faintly in his chest. He pushed himself up, ignoring the daggers of pain, and pressed his ear to the wall. The hum was there, faint, but undeniable. It was coming from below. He ran his hands over the wall panels. They were seamless, covered in dust. He followed the hum, tracing it along the base of the wall until he reached a large, collapsed section of the lobby where the ceiling had caved in. Behind a mountain of fallen duracrete and twisted steel, a portion of the wall had been torn away, and behind it was a dark, narrow opening. A service corridor? No, it was too clean, the edges of the opening too precise. The air wafting out of it was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the decaying stench of the city. The hum was stronger here. With the last of his strength, he squeezed through the gap. He was in a small, dark antechamber. In the center was a single object, an elevator. It was old, brass-caged, and looked like it belonged in a museum. A single, unlit button was set into the wall beside it. He pushed it. Nothing happened. Frustration and despair warred within him. He slammed his fist against the wall next to the button. The impact jarred something loose. A panel beside the elevator sprang open, revealing a tangle of wires and a small, biometric hand scanner, dark and dead. It must have been the original access point. Time and damage had rendered it useless. He slumped against the wall opposite the elevator, his head hitting the cool metal with a dull thud. This was it. A dead end. He was going to die in a forgotten closet at the bottom of a dead city. He slid down the wall, his weight pressing against the cold steel. And then, something happened. A low groan of ancient machinery echoed in the small space. A single, dim blue light flickered to life above the elevator doors. The wall panel he was leaning on hadn't been a wall at all. It was a pressure plate, calibrated for a specific weight, a failsafe that hadn't been activated in decades. His exhausted collapse had triggered it. With a hiss of depressurizing air that sounded like a final sigh, a massive section of the floor began to descend, revealing a staircase spiraling down into absolute darkness. The humming grew louder, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated up through the soles of his boots. Izuku stared into the abyss. Every instinct screamed at him to run, that this was a tomb, a place not meant for the living. But the city above was a slaughterhouse. Down here was a mystery. Down here was power. Taking a shuddering breath, he stepped onto the top stair. The platform behind him rose silently back into place, sealing him in darkness. He was committed now. One painful step at a time, he began his descent into the heart of the earth, following the hum of the machine, guided only by the hope that whatever lay at the bottom of this darkness was better than the nightmare he had fallen into. He didn't know how long he walked. Time had ceased to have meaning. Finally, the stairs ended at a massive, circular vault door. It was made of a dull, black metal, and emblazoned on its center was a symbol that made the hair on his arms stand up. It was a bat. Stylized, sharp, and spreading its wings wide, encased in a dark ellipse. There was no handle, no keypad. Just the symbol. He reached out a trembling, blood-caked hand and pressed it against the cold metal. For a moment, nothing. Then, a faint blue light traced the outline of the bat symbol. There was a series of deep, resonant thunks as massive locking bolts, untouched for an age, retracted into the walls. With a groan that shook the very rock around him, the great door slid open. A wave of cool, dry, sterile air washed over him. Emergency lighting, a soft, ethereal blue, flickered to life and rose along the cavernous ceiling, revealing a space so vast it felt like it belonged outdoors. He saw impossible things. A colossal Lincoln penny. A life-sized, terrifyingly realistic Tyrannosaurus Rex, frozen mid-roar. A cascading waterfall pouring into an underground river. Display cases holding strange costumes and weapons. And in the center of a raised platform, a vehicle that was less a car and more a piece of jagged, armored darkness. Dominating it all was a massive computer, its multiple screens dark and dormant, sitting before a single, high-backed chair. Izuku Midoriya, bloody, broken, and a universe away from home, stumbled forward into the silent, hallowed ground of the Batcave. He did not know where he was, or what this place represented, but as the vault door sealed shut behind him, plunging the world above back into its gray misery, he felt the first, faint, terrifying glimmer of a new purpose. He had fallen into Gotham's grave, and in the crypt of its fallen night, a different kind of hero was about to be born. The great vault door hissed shut behind him, and the sound was one of profound finality. It was the sound of a tomb being sealed, of a world being locked away. For a moment, Izuku was plunged back into absolute, suffocating darkness. The silence that followed was heavier than any he had ever known, a physical pressure against his eardrums. He was underground, trapped, with the weight of a dead city pressing down on him. The thought sent a fresh spike of panic through his exhausted mind. Then, with a soft hum that seemed to emanate from the very stone, the emergency lights intensified. The ethereal blue glow solidified, pushing the deepest shadows back into the crevices and alcoves of the colossal cavern. Izuku's breath hitched. He took a staggering step forward, then another, his pain momentarily forgotten, his mind reeling from the sheer, impossible scale of his surroundings. This wasn't a basement. It was a cathedral. A monument to a singular, obsessive purpose. The air was cold, dry, and sterile, carrying the faint, clean scent of ozone and chilled metal. Every surface was coated in a fine, uniform layer of dust, a gray shroud that spoke of long years of neglect. His boots left the first clear footprints this place had seen in a lifetime. To his right, a series of platforms held vehicles under dusty tarps, but the one in the center was uncovered. It was a brutalist wedge of black armor and reinforced plating, with tires thick enough to belong on a tank. It was a weapon on wheels, and the sight of it made the support item cars at UA look like children's toys. He could see the faint outline of a bat symbol etched into a hubcap, almost lost beneath the grime. To his left, the cavern wall was lined with massive, illuminated glass cases. He limped towards the nearest one, his curiosity overriding his caution. Inside, mounted on a stark black mannequin, was a costume. It was made of a dark gray, high-density fabric, with a jet-black cowl, cape, and gauntlets. The cowl's ears were long and sharp, like a demon's horns, and the eyes were stark white lenses, devoid of all emotion. On the chest was the same stylized bat symbol he'd seen on the vault door. It wasn't the bright, hopeful uniform of a hero from his world. This was tactical gear. Body armor. A predator's skin. He moved to the next case. A different suit, similar in design but with a splash of color, a vibrant yellow circle around the bat emblem. Another case held a scorched and tattered uniform of red, green, and yellow, with a single black R over the heart. The glass of this case was cracked, and a small plaque at its base was too dusty to read. There was a sense of tragedy about it, a silent memorial that made Izuku's chest ache for a reason he couldn't name. It reminded him of Sir Nightie's memorial at UA, a tribute to a fallen hero. The thought that this world, this broken place, had heroes who had also fallen, filled him with a profound and sorrowful kinship. His gaze swept across the rest of the cavern. The giant penny, the robotic dinosaur, his analytical mind tried to categorize them. Trophies? Mementos from past battles? The scale is illogical. Perhaps they have symbolic significance? He was a fanboy in a ghosts museum, a historian with no history book, and then he saw the heart of the chamber. On a raised central platform, dominating the entire space, was the computer. It was a behemoth, a constellation of a dozen massive, dark screens arranged in a semicircle around a single, throne-like chair. Cables as thick as his arms snaked from its base, disappearing into the floor. Even dormant, it radiated an aura of immense power and knowledge. This was the nexus. The brain. He had to know more. He had to understand where he was. With renewed purpose, he climbed the shallow steps to the platform. The chair was made of black leather, cracked and faded with age, but its ergonomic design was clear. It was a pilot's seat, a command chair built for long, grueling hours. He reached out and touched the armrest, half expecting it to crumble to dust. It was solid. He sat down. The chair sighed under his weight, a soft puff of ancient air. He was facing the dead monolith of screens. He ran a hand over the keyboard, the keys smooth and cool beneath his grimy fingers. He searched for a power button, a switch, anything. Finding none, he acted on a desperate impulse. He pressed the largest key on the board, the space bar. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a low hum that had been vibrating just at the edge of his hearing deepened. A single line of blinking green text appeared on the central monitor, stark against the black void. System status, critical. Hibernation mode active. Power, auxiliary generator 3. Efficiency at 17%. External sensors, offline. Archives, intact. Standby. Run diagnostic? Y/N. Izuku's heart hammered against his bruised ribs. It was alive. He shakily typed Y and hit enter. Lines of code scrolled across the screen at an impossible speed, diagnostics running on systems that had been asleep for decades. Most of the results were red error messages. Network connection failed. Wayne SAT uplink severed. Remote systems unresponsive. But one line flashed green. Local archive ghost accessible. He navigated the simple, text-based interface with fumbling fingers. He found the directory labeled ghost and opened it. It was a log. A journal. The entries were dated, but the year was a meaningless number to him. The author was listed only as B. His eyes scanned the first entry he could access, dated nearly 3 decades ago. Log 4587.12. Multiple front assault initiated. Coordinated. Joker at the reservoir. Riddler has the power grid. Crane has unleashed a new airborne agent in the Narrows. Simultaneous attacks on Arkham staff and GCPD command. It's a citywide decapitation strike. Too perfect. Someone is coordinating them. The usual chaos is missing. There's a strategy here I don't recognize. Oracle is blind. They cut the fiber lines. All of them. Communications are down to shortwave. Nightwing is holding the line at the bridge. Robin is with me. The city is a war zone. I've prepared for this. The contingencies are in place. Gotham will hold. Izuku read the words, his blood running cold. This B was a hero. A commander defending his city from an overwhelming attack. He scrolled down, his fingers trembling. The next log was from 2 days later. Log 4587.14. It's worse. It's not just a siege. It's an apocalypse. Crane's toxin was a delivery system. It was laced with a modified Joker venom and a new mutagenic compound derived from Ivy's research. It doesn't just cause fear, it rewrites things. The gas reacted with the industrial chemical waste in the river. The rain is poison. It's changing people. It's changing everything. We're calling it the shattering. The power grid is gone. The bridges are down. We lost contact with Nightwing an hour ago. His last transmission was compromised. The city is screaming. God, the whole city is screaming. Izuku felt a wave of nausea. The mutated vines, the rat-like creatures, the desperation in the scavenger's eyes, it all clicked into place. This wasn't just a societal collapse. It was an ecological one, a man-made plague. He scrolled further, his dread mounting. He found the last entry. It was corrupted, flickering on the screen, the text interspersed with static. It was recorded just a day after the previous one. Log 4587.15 final entry. Lost them. All of them. Tim. Barbara. Dick gone. The city is a graveyard. The toxin has saturated everything. The sky is bleeding. They broke me. Not my back, my spirit. The one thing I thought was unbreakable. I've sealed the cave. The lower levels are flooded to prevent access. This is all that's left. A monument to my failure. A ghost story for a city of ghosts. My name is Bruce Wayne. I was the Batman. And I failed. Let the world forget Gotham. Let it forget me. There is no hope here. Only fear, and in the end, fear wasn't enough. Signal lost. The screen went blank, returning to the single, blinking cursor. Izuku stared at the void, the words burning in his mind. Bruce Wayne. The Batman. A hero who had lost everything. A man who had fought to his last breath and believed he had failed. He felt an overwhelming wave of empathy, a kinship with this ghost. He understood the weight of that failure. He thought of All Might, of the burden of being a symbol, and how crushing it must be when that symbol falls. He had fallen into Batman's tomb. Touching story, isn't it? A real tearjerker. The voice was sharp, female, and dripping with a cynicism so profound it could have rusted steel. It came from the shadows behind the T-Rex. Izuku shot out of the chair, his body instantly flooding with adrenaline. He spun around, dropping into a defensive crouch, the pain in his ribs a distant echo. One for all sparked to life, a faint green aura causing the dust motes around him to dance. Who's there? A figure emerged from the darkness. It was a young woman, maybe a year or two older than him. She was wiry and lean, dressed in a patched-up mechanic's jumpsuit, her dark hair tied back in a messy bun. She held a heavy, custom-made wrench like a weapon, and her dark, intelligent eyes scanned him from head to toe, taking in his torn costume, the flickering green energy, and the desperation on his face. She was not impressed. Powering up the main console? Bold, she said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. You just used about 6 months' worth of the reserve power I've been hoarding, so you'd better have a good reason for trespassing in my house. Your house? Izuku stammered, staying in his crouch. Who are you? She took another step forward, into the blue light. Her face was smudged with grease, but her features were sharp and defined. She looked tired, but her gaze was alert, like a predator's. The name's Lux, and this cave, this glorious, dusty museum of failure, is my inheritance. My grandfather helped build it. I keep the lights on. So I'll ask again, who are you, and what are you doing here? Izuku straightened up slightly, letting the green aura fade. She didn't seem immediately hostile, just territorial. He had to choose his words carefully. The truth was insane, but it was all he had. My name is Izuku Midoriya. I'm not from here. I was in a fight with a villain whose quirk, whose power, it sent me here. I didn't know this place existed. I was just looking for shelter. Lux raised a skeptical eyebrow. A villain? A quirk? You're talking like the old world is still out there. Newsflash, Technicolor, it's not. There are no heroes, no villains. Just survivors and monsters. And right now, I'm not sure which one you are. I'm a hero, Izuku said, the words feeling hollow and foolish even as he said them. Or, I'm training to be one. Lux let out a short, bark-like laugh. It was a sound devoid of any real humor. A hero. Right. And what's with the light show? Some kind of bioluminescence? A static cling quirk? It's called One for All, he said quietly. It's complicated. I bet it is, she retorted. She pointed the wrench at him. You read the ghost logs, didn't you? You know what happened to this city. You know what happened to the last man who called himself a hero in this town. He didn't fail, Izuku said, a sudden surge of conviction in his voice. He fought until he couldn't fight anymore. He saved what he could. He saved nothing. Lux snapped, her cynical mask cracking for a moment to reveal a flash of raw anger. He left a legacy of fear in a city that learned to fear something bigger. My grandfather, Lucius Fox, he believed in him. He gave his life trying to help him. And for what? So Bruce Wayne could lock himself in his basement to die while the city he swore to protect rotted to the ground. This place isn't a memorial, Midoriya. It's a confession. She stalked over to a smaller, auxiliary console near the main computer and slammed her hand down on a keypad. One of the smaller screens flickered to life, not with text, but with a grainy, black and white image. You want to be a hero? She asked, her voice low and dangerous. Take a look at your city. The screen showed a live feed. It was a bird's-eye view, likely from a hidden camera on one of the few structurally sound buildings left. It depicted a makeshift market square, a collection of tents and stalls huddled in the shadow of a ruined cathedral. People, thin and ragged, were bartering with scavenged goods. This is Port Mercy, Lux explained, her voice flat. One of the few semi-stable settlements. They filter their own water, grow their own fungus. They survive. As Izuku watched, a group of figures entered the frame. They were larger than the settlers, dressed in crude armor made of scrap metal and bones. They moved with a swaggering confidence, brandishing sharpened weapons. They began to kick over stalls, grabbing what they wanted. When one of the settlers tried to resist, they beat him to the ground without a second thought. The other settlers just watched, their heads bowed in fear. Who are they? Izuku asked, his fists clenching. They call themselves the Rust Dogs, Lux said. One of a dozen gangs that carve up the wastes. They take what they want. Everyone knows the rules. you pay the tithe, you look the other way, you get to live another day. She switched the feed. The new image was from a night vision camera, looking down a dark, narrow alley. A lone scavenger was picking through a pile of trash. Suddenly, from the shadows, one of the mutated rat creatures, just like the ones he had fought, pounced on the scavenger, and the feed cut to static. The rules don't apply to the ferals, Lux said coldly. They just eat. She switched the feed one last time. This one was blurry, seemingly filmed from a distance. It showed a figure, tall and draped in rags, standing on a pile of rubble, preaching to a crowd of mesmerized followers. And that, she whispered, a note of genuine fear in her voice, is the new god of Gotham. They call him the Carrion King. He doesn't want your water or your food. He wants your mind. He preaches that fear is the only truth, the only purity left in the world. His followers are fanatics. They don't just kill you, they make you wish you were dead. She turned the monitor off, and the cave was plunged back into a heavier silence. That's the world you fell into, hero, Lux said, her voice barely a whisper. There are no easy answers here. There are no clean fights. Your bright costume, your fancy powers, out there, they'll just make you a bigger target. You want to survive? You'll forget all that hero nonsense. You'll learn to hide, to run, and to be invisible. Izuku stared at the blank screen, the horrific images burned into his retinas. The brutal apathy of the rust dogs. The primal horror of the ferals. The insidious fanaticism of the Carrion King. He thought of the family he had saved, who had looked at him with terror. He thought of the scavenger he had kicked, the sickening crunch of bone under his boot. Lux was right. She was absolutely, horribly right. His heroism, the kind All Might had taught him, was the heroism of a civilized world. It was about inspiring hope in a populace that was safe enough to feel it. It was about reassuring smiles and bright colors. It was about being a pillar of a society that still had pillars to support. This place had no pillars. It was rubble all the way down. Hope wasn't a symbol here, it was a weakness. A bright light in this endless darkness would only draw the monsters closer. He looked at the final log entry, still echoing in his mind. There is no hope here. Only fear, and in the end, fear wasn't enough. Batman had failed. But why? He had the resources, the training, the will. He used fear as a weapon. But maybe he was still a man underneath it all. Maybe he was still trying to save the city that was, not protect the ruin that it had become. Izuku's mind, a frantic engine of analysis, began to connect the disparate pieces. The needs of this world. The legacy of the Batman. And the terrible, overwhelming power of One for All. His power was too much for this place. A 5% kick could kill a man. A 100% smash would level a city block and everyone in it. He couldn't use his power the way he was taught. He couldn't be a bright, shining beacon. But Batman's methods, stealth, strategy, intimidation, psychological warfare, paired with the carefully controlled, surgical application of his power? A burst of speed to appear like a phantom, a flick of his finger to create a terrifying concussive blast from the shadows. Black Whip to ensnare and terrify, not just capture. He wouldn't be a hero. He wouldn't be a man. He would have to be something else. A ghost. A myth. A symbol. But not a symbol of peace. He had to become a symbol of fear. A terror that could hunt the other terrors in the dark. A nightmare that the Rust Dogs and the Carrion King would learn to dread more than anything else. He had to take Batman's ideal and amplify it, purify it of the man underneath. He had to become the myth that Bruce Wayne could never fully be. He turned his gaze from the computer, across the dusty cavern, to the display cases. His eyes settled on one in particular. It held a spare batsuit. It was matte black, with fewer armored plates, designed for stealth over direct combat. The cowlsers were shorter, more primal. The cape was made of a material that seemed to drink the light. He walked towards it, his limp less pronounced, his steps filled with a grim, terrifying certainty. He felt as if he were moving in a dream, pulled by an invisible tide of destiny. Lux watched him, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "What are you doing?" "You said it yourself," Izuku said, his voice low and raspy, a sound that didn't feel like his own. "My way won't work here." He stood before the glass case. He saw his own reflection superimposed over the dark suit. A boy's scared face in a torn, bright green costume, looking at the image of a monster. He looked at the cowl, the empty white lenses staring back at him, a blank slate of cold, impersonal dread. To put that on would be to kill Izuku Midoriya, the cheerful, crying fanba who dreamed of being the next All Might. To let Deku, the hero who saves, die. But maybe they were already dead. Maybe they had died in the vortex that brought him here. This city doesn't need a hero, he whispered, more to himself than to Lux. It needs a ghost. It needs a knight. He placed his hand on the glass, his fingers tracing the outline of the bat symbol. He felt the weight of a legacy he didn't ask for, the crushing responsibility for a city he didn't know. He had fallen to the wrong side of the sky, into a world without hope. Fine. If there was no hope to be found, he would give them something else. He would give them a reason to be afraid of the dark again. He turned to Lux, his eyes, once so bright and full of optimistic fire, now burning with a cold, hard resolve. They were the eyes of a soldier, a survivor, a hunter. "Help me," he said, and it was not a request. It was a statement of intent. "Help me make it fit." Lux stared at him for a long, silent moment. She saw the transformation in his eyes, the death of the boy and the birth of something harder. She saw the insane, impossible conviction of a true believer. For the first time since she was a child, she felt a flicker of something other than cynicism and despair. It was a dangerous, unfamiliar feeling. She gave a slow, reluctant nod. "The world's gone crazy anyway," she muttered, picking up her wrench. "Might as well lean into it." The Batcave became Izuku's entire world. Time ceased to be measured by the rising and setting of a sun he could no longer see, but by the rhythmic hum of the auxiliary generator, and the cycles of his own exhaustion. The cavern was a pocket of preserved history, a sterile bubble against the decaying city above, and within its confines, Izuku Midoriya began the agonizing process of forging a ghost. His days, or what he designated as such, were spent in furious study. He devoured the Batcomputer's archives, poring over tactical files, case logs, and psychological profiles of villains whose names sounded like characters from a twisted fairy tale. The Joker, the Riddler, Penguin. He read Bruce Wayne's personal training regimens, his notes on stealth, interrogation, and fear as a psychological weapon. His own notebooks, salvaged from his backpack which had miraculously survived the dimensional trip, were quickly filled with his frantic, analytical scrawl, a blend of Japanese and newly learned English, cross-referencing Batman's techniques with his own understanding of combat and quirk analysis. "You're trying to learn how to be a phantom by reading a book," Lux commented one cycle, not looking up from the plasma torch she was using to cut a fresh plate for his damaged chest armor. She was perched on a workbench, surrounded by a chaotic halo of tools and schematics. "That's like learning to swim on dry land. Theory is the foundation of practice," Izuku muttered, his eyes glued to a schematic of the grapnel gun. "Understanding the principle minimizes the risk of error." "Sure. Tell that to gravity." The nights were for practice. And pain. The first time he tried the grapnel gun, he'd approached it with the same mindset he used for learning a new application of One for All. He calculated the trajectory, the tensile strength of the line, the velocity needed to clear the gap between two high rock formations in the cave. He fired. The claw bit into the rock with a satisfying thunk. He engaged the reel, and was immediately yanked off his feet, slamming face first into the unforgiving stone floor. Lux's dry laughter echoed through the cavern. "Forgot to account for inertia, hero? This isn't your magic lightning. It's physics. And physics is a bitch," he learned. He learned through bruises and failure. Swinging on the grapnel was nothing like the organic, intuitive flight of Black Whip, or the explosive freedom of a full cowling leap. It was a violent, mechanical process. The sudden pull threatened to dislocate his shoulder. The swing was a pendulum he had to fight, not a flight path he could command. He spent hours swinging through the cavern, crashing into stalactites, misjudging his releases and dropping into the icy underground river, until the movement started to feel less like a series of calculations and more like a crude, brutal extension of his will. The suit was their biggest project. Lux, a genius of pragmatic engineering, was in her element. She saw not a sacred relic, but a piece of hardware in need of an upgrade. The original is a Kevlar Nomex Triweave, she explained, running a diagnostic tool over the stealth suit he'd chosen. Good for its day. Stops bullets, resists fire. But it's heavy. Rigid. It was made for a man who relied on armor and brute strength. She tapped a key on her data pad. You're different. You're faster. More agile. You need flexibility. Izuku had an idea. My costume. The material is a carbon fiber alloy. It's lighter and designed to stretch, to handle the kinetic kickback from my quirk, from my power. So they began the painstaking process of hybridization. With Lux's surgical precision and Izuku's knowledge of his own gear, they created a patchwork symbol. They stripped the heavier plates from the batsuit, replacing the undersuit with the dark green, more pliable material of his own hero costume. It felt strange, wearing his colors under the oppressive black of the bat. It was a secret reminder of the boy he had been, hidden beneath the monster he was trying to become. They kept the cowl, the gauntlets, and the cape. They were essential. The cowl, with its integrated comms and spectral white lenses, was a mask that stripped him of his humanity. It made him a thing. The bladed gauntlets were both weapons and tools. But the cape was a work of art. Memory cloth, Lux explained, showing him how to send a faint electrical charge through it. It went from a flexible, fabric-like state to a rigid, glider-wing shape in an instant. Good for breaking a fall or for a dramatic entrance. Your predecessor was big on drama. It's a tool for misdirection, Izuku corrected, his mind echoing with a line from one of the logs. It makes the target bigger, obscures the user's form. They don't know where the attack is coming from, Lux smirked. Right. Drama. He practiced with the batarangs, the smooth, weighted metal foreign in his hands. He wasn't throwing them to incapacitate, but to distract, to disarm, to herd his enemies like a sheepdog. He spent hours in front of a makeshift target range, learning to ricochet them off surfaces, to use them to cut ropes or shatter lights. He mastered the quick release of smoke pellets, learning to use the sudden cloud of gray as a mobile shadow, a way to vanish from sight in a wide open space. After what felt like an eternity of preparation, of stitching and soldering, of practice and pain, the time came. Lux had picked up chatter on her long-range scanner. 2 local warlords were meeting to trade. The target was significant, a crate of pre-shattering automatic rifles, a treasure that could shift the balance of power in this sector of the wasteland. The seller is a man named Scab, Lux said, her voice a tinny whisper in his ear from the comm unit she'd integrated into his new cowl. He was perched on the edge of the Wayne Tower elevator shaft, the only reliable way in and out of the cave. Runs a crew of scavengers out of the old subway tunnels. Paranoid, twitchy, but dangerous. The buyer is known as the Ironmonger. Rules the metal yards to the south. He's got the muscle, but not the firepower. This deal gives it to him. Izuku stood, the modified suit settling around him. It was lighter than he expected, but the weight of the cowl, of the symbol, was immense. The white lenses stared back at him in the reflection of a piece of grimy glass, and for a terrifying second, he didn't recognize himself. The green of his undersuit was barely visible at the seams, a hint of a forest under a starless night sky. The meat is at the old Trident shipyard. Big, open spaces, lots of rusted metal for cover. And lots of places for an ambush. I'm not going to ambush them, Izuku said, his voice distorted by the cowl's modulator, deeper and raspier than his own. I'm going to stop them. Just try not to get shot, hero. Lux's voice crackled back. The suit's reinforced, not invincible. He stepped to the edge of the gaping chasm that was the tower's central core and fired his grapnel gun into the darkness above. The line went taut. He took a deep breath, the filtered air of the cowl tasting sterile and artificial, and stepped off the ledge. He didn't fall. He swung out into the dead heart of Gotham. The city at night was a different beast entirely. By day it was a graveyard, silent and somber. By night, it was a hunting ground. The wind howled through the canyons of ruined steel and concrete, a constant, mournful scream. Unseen things skittered in the alleys below. The only light came from the sickly yellow glow of scavenger fires, small pockets of defiant life in an ocean of black. Izuku moved across the rooftops, a flitting shadow against the oppressive clouds. His movements were clumsy, graceless. Each swing of the grapnel was a jerky, calculated affair. He landed too hard, his reinforced boots clanging on loose metal sheeting. He misjudged a leap and had to scramble up the side of a ledge, his bladed gauntlets scraping loudly against the brickwork. He was a bull in a china shop of ghosts. Quiet, he commanded himself, his frustration mounting. Batman was a whisper. You're a damn parade. He finally reached the perimeter of the Trident shipyard. From his vantage point on a corroded crane, he looked down on the scene. It was a ghost of industry. Rusted ship skeletons lay in dry docks like the bleached bones of leviathans. The air smelled of salt, rust, and desperation. In a clearing near a derelict warehouse, two groups faced each other. One group, wiry and dressed in rags, huddled around a man with a scarred face and twitching eyes, Scab. They were guarding a large wooden crate. The other group was larger, bulkier men and women draped in scrap metal armor. Their leader was a mountain of a man with a crude iron helmet covering his face, the Ironmonger. Izuku's mind went into analytical mode. 10 hostiles in total. 4 with Scab, 5 with the Ironmonger. All armed with melee weapons, pipes and blades. The prize is the crate. Primary objective, secure the weapons. Secondary objective, incapacitate the hostiles without fatalities. It was a pro-hero's mission brief, a problem to be solved with efficiency and minimal force. It was the only way he knew how to think. Stealth approach is optimal, he thought, scanning the environment. Take out the sentries on the warehouse roof first. Use the shadows and the noise of the wind to mask my approach. It was a perfect plan on paper. He fired a silent grapnel line to the warehouse roof, the reel whirring softly. He ascended, the wind whipping his cape around him. He was 10 feet from the top when his boots scraped against a loose pipe clinging to the wall. It clattered down, hitting a metal catwalk below with a series of loud, echoing bangs. Down in the yard, every head snapped up. What was that? Scab hissed, his hand flying to a large knife at his belt. Probably just ferals in the walls. The Ironmonger grunted, though his men also tensed, gripping their weapons tighter. Izuku froze, clinging to the wall, his heart pounding in his chest. Idiot! You were careless! He'd blown his stealth approach before it had even begun. The plan was dead. He needed to adapt, to salvage the situation. But the training of a lifetime is a hard thing to unlearn. When stealth fails, a pro-hero makes a statement. They take control of the situation through presence and intimidation. His mind flashed to All Might's debut video, the booming laugh, the confident declaration. I am here! He couldn't do that. But he could still make an entrance. He reached the roof, his movements now rushed. He saw the two lookouts, their backs to him as they peered down into the yard. He crept up behind them. This was his chance to recover, to take them out silently. But then he heard the Ironmonger's voice boom from below. Enough of this. Show me the goods, Scab. I ain't got all night. They were making the exchange. He was out of time. Izuku made a choice. The wrong one. Instead of a silent takedown, he dropped a smoke pellet between the two lookouts. As they choked and sputtered in confusion, he vaulted over them, landing on the edge of the roof overlooking the entire scene. He stood there, silhouetted against the gray sky, his cape billowing in the wind. He was the very image of the creature from the display case. He was the Batman. It was dramatic. It was imposing. It was also incredibly stupid. Down below, 10 pairs of eyes widened. For a split second, there was a stunned, terrified silence. He had their attention. What in the hell is that? One of Scab's men whispered, his voice trembling. Izuku leaped. He spread his cape, the memory cloth stiffening into a glider, and descended into the center of the clearing, landing in a 3-point crouch between the two factions. The impact of his landing was louder than he intended, kicking up a cloud of rust and dust. He rose to his full height. This transaction is over, he said, the voice modulator turning his declaration into a low, synthetic growl. Leave the weapons. Disperse. Now. For another heartbeat, the shock held them frozen. He had appeared from nowhere, a demon in black. But then, the Ironmonger threw his head back and laughed, a loud, grating sound of metal on metal. Look at this. A man in a bat costume, come to play games. He hefted a massive sledgehammer from his shoulder. Boys, looks like we got ourselves a new toy to break. The spell was broken. They weren't terrified citizens or superstitious scavengers. They were hardened killers. A costume didn't scare them, it just made them angry. One of the ironmonger's men charged, swinging a length of sharpened pipe. Izuku reacted instantly, sidestepping the clumsy attack. He threw a batarang, not at the man, but at a hanging chain nearby. The clang of metal on metal was the starting pistol for chaos. He moved, a blur of black and dark green. He ducked under a swing from a crowbar, drove his elbow into the man's gut, and used a smoke pellet to vanish as two more converged on him. He reappeared behind them, using a sweeping leg maneuver to take them both down, but he was outnumbered. And they were everywhere. This wasn't a one-on-one duel. It was a chaotic, swirling melee. A blade whistled past his cowl, nicking his ear. He felt a pipe slam into his back, the armor absorbing most of the blow but still sending a jolt of pain through his spine. He was dodging, weaving, striking, but it was all reactive. He had no control. He was fighting like Deku. He was engaging them head-on, using his superior speed and training in a direct confrontation. He was trying to be a martial artist in a dog pile. Scab's men, seeing their chance, pried open the crate. The sight of the rifles inside galvanized them. "Get 'em loaded!" Scab shrieked. Izuku saw it. His primary objective was failing. He needed to get to the crate. He threw 2 batarangs, disarming the men trying to load the weapons, but it only bought him a second. The ironmonger was on him, his sledgehammer swinging in a deadly arc. Izuku dodged, the hammer smashing into the ground where he'd been standing, cracking the concrete. The sheer force of the blow was staggering. He couldn't go toe-to-toe with this man. He fired his grapnel, not upwards, but at the ironmonger's leg. He reeled, pulling the giant off balance. As the man stumbled, Izuku rushed in, aiming a series of precise, non-lethal strikes at his joints, shoulder, elbow, knee. But as he focused on the leader, one of Scab's men, who had managed to load a rifle, took aim. He was a bad shot, panicked and shaky, but in a firefight, luck is a factor. Lux's voice screamed in his ear. "Gun! Left side, he's got a lock!" Izuku heard the crack of the gunshot a split second before he felt the searing heat. He twisted, but not fast enough. The bullet tore through the fleshy part of his shoulder, missing the main armor plate. The impact was like being hit by a white-hot hammer. Pain, sharp and blinding, exploded through him. He cried out, a raw, human sound that was not distorted by the modulator. He staggered back, clutching his shoulder. Blood, hot and slick, began to soak through his suit. The smell of his own blood filled his senses. The ironmonger roared, seeing his chance. He swung the sledgehammer in a low, brutal sweep aimed at Izuku's legs. There was no time for a plan. No time for a gadget. No time for stealth. There was only pain, instinct, and the familiar, furious thrum of power. He abandoned the teachings of the ghost, and embraced the power of the god he carried inside him. Full calling. 5%. Green lightning erupted around him, a sudden, shocking flare in the grimy darkness. He leaped, flipping clean over the sledgehammer's arc. He twisted in midair, his injured shoulder screaming in protest, and brought his leg around in a savage kick. He didn't aim for the ironmonger's head. He didn't even aim for his chest. He aimed for the sledgehammer. His boot, charged with the kinetic force of One for All, connected with the thick metal head of the weapon. The result was catastrophic. The sledgehammer didn't just get knocked away. It exploded. The metal head shattered into 1,000 pieces of lethal shrapnel. The ironmonger was thrown backward as if hit by a car, his hands shredded, the shockwave of the impact lifting him off his feet and slamming him into the side of the warehouse. He collapsed in a heap, groaning and unconscious. The shrapnel tore through the clearing. Men screamed as they were peppered with razor-sharp metal fragments. The man with the rifle dropped it, clutching a face that was now a mask of blood. The sudden, overwhelming violence of the act was more terrifying than any theatrical entrance could ever be. Silence fell, absolute and profound, broken only by the groans of the wounded. Scab and his remaining men, who had been on the verge of opening fire, stared at Izuku. They weren't looking at a man in a costume anymore. They were looking at a supernatural event. They saw the green lightning still crackling around his body, the impossible power that had just vaporized solid steel. Scab dropped his knife. He uttered a single, terrified word. Demon! He turned and ran, his men scrambling after him, disappearing into the labyrinthine shipyard. They left the guns. They left their wounded. They just fled. Izuku stood there, the green lightning fading, leaving him panting in the sudden quiet. His shoulder was on fire. His ears were ringing. He had won. He had secured the weapons. He had stopped the deal. But it wasn't a victory. It was a disaster. The return trip to the cave was an agonizing crawl through hell. Every swing of the grapnel sent fresh waves of agony through his shoulder. He left a trail of his own blood across the rooftops of Gotham. By the time he collapsed through the elevator entrance and into the cold, sterile air of the Batcave, he was pale and trembling, on the verge of passing out. Lux was there, a medical kit already waiting. Her face was a grim, tight mask of concern, her usual sarcasm completely gone. Sit, she commanded, helping him to a stool and cutting away the damaged fabric of his suit. She worked with practiced efficiency, her hands steady as she cleaned the wound. It was a clean through and through, but he'd lost a lot of blood. I stopped them, Izuku gasped, his teeth chattering from shock. I got the guns. He was reporting the results of his mission, like a good student. Lux paused, dabbing an antiseptic pad on the wound. Izuku hissed in pain. You stopped them? She said, her voice dangerously quiet. I was monitoring the local comm chatter. I saw the energy spike on the cave's sensors. Let me tell you what you did, Izuku. She looked him straight in the eye, her dark gaze pinning him in place. You crashed a party, made a speech, and then got into a brawl you almost lost. You announced your presence to the entire world, got yourself shot, and then leveled the place with a magic light show. She gestured vaguely towards the world above. Up there, right now, the survivors aren't whispering about a ghost in the shadows. They're screaming about a green lightning demon that can tear metal apart with a kick. You weren't a phantom. You weren't even a man. You were a spectacle. Every word was a physical blow. He had failed. Miserably. He had tried to be Batman, but the moment he was in real danger, the moment he felt pain, he had defaulted to being Deku. And Deku, in this world, was a sledgehammer in a room full of scalpels. You went in there like a pro-hero, she continued, her voice softening slightly, becoming less accusatory and more instructive. You saw a problem, and you met it with direct force. That's not how you survive here. That's not how you win. She finished bandaging his shoulder, her movements gentle. Bruce Wayne. Batman, he understood something you don't yet. Fear isn't about the punch you land. It's about the punch they think is coming from every shadow, at any second. It's the silence. The not knowing. You win the fight before it even starts up here. She tapped her temple. You make them so scared of the dark that they run from their own shadow. You were just a bigger monster in a yard full of them. Izuku stared at his hands, at the black gauntlet stained with his own blood. She was right. He had worn the cowl, but he hadn't understood it. It wasn't just a mask, it was a philosophy, a promise of silent, inevitable justice delivered from the darkness. He had treated it like a costume. His first hunt was over. He had the physical scars to prove it. But the real wounds were deeper. He had survived, but his identity, his entire heroic doctrine, was shattered. The boy who had wanted to save everyone with a smile was a liability. The hero known as Deku had no place in Gotham. He looked up, his reflection staring back at him from one of the Batcomputer's dark screens. He saw the monstrous cowl, the pale, sweat-slicked face of a boy underneath, and the grim determination solidifying in his eyes. He had failed his first test. But he would not fail the next one. Next time, he whispered, his voice hoarse, there will be no lightning. Next time, they wouldn't see him coming at all. The shipyard incident carved a scar into Izuku's psyche, deeper and more defining than the bullet wound in his shoulder. The memory of the crackle of his own power, the explosive shredding of steel, the raw terror on the scavengers' faces, it became his crucible. He replayed the entire disastrous encounter in his mind 1,000 times, each replay a fresh torment. His approach had been wrong, his execution sloppy, his reliance on overwhelming power a catastrophic failure of principle. He hadn't been Batman. He had been a walking natural disaster. That failure became his new teacher, a far harsher instructor than any at UA High. It taught him the lesson Lux had tried to articulate. In Gotham, power wasn't a shout, it was a whisper. The most terrifying thing wasn't the monster you could see, but the one you only suspected was there. His training regimen changed. He still pushed his body to its physical limits, but the focus shifted from power output to absolute control. He practiced summoning and dismissing one for all's green lightning in the space of a heartbeat, not as a weapon, but as a feint, a flicker in the corner of an enemy's eye. He trained to channel a mere 1% into his fingertips for a silent, disabling nerve strike, or into the soles of his boots for a moment of unnatural adhesion to a wall, allowing him to cling to the shadows like a spider. His power became a secret, a hidden trump card, not a primary tool. The cave's training deck became his sanctuary and his torment chamber. He ran holographic simulations, not of combat, but of infiltration. The objective was no longer to defeat the enemies, but to move through their territory completely undetected, to complete an objective and vanish, leaving only a lingering sense of unease behind. He failed, again and again. A holographic guard would turn at the sound of his cape rustling. A pressure plate he hadn't seen would trigger a silent alarm. Each failure was a lesson written in frustration. "You're still thinking like a hero," Lux told him, watching his silhouette fail a simulation for the 7th time in a row. She was leaning against the console, sipping a lukewarm cup of what she called recycled coffee. "You're looking for the most efficient path from A to B. The ghost this place was built for didn't think that way." He thought in 3 dimensions. He used their own assumptions against them. He wasn't on the floor. He was in the vents, on the ceiling, outside the window. He was everywhere and nowhere. Izuku took her words to heart. He started to think not just about his own movements, but about the environment itself. He learned to listen to the city's groans, to use the scream of the wind to mask the whisper of his grapnel line. He learned to distinguish the skittering of ferals from the shuffling of human feet. He became a student of the ruin. Weeks bled into a month, then 2. The physical wound in his shoulder healed, leaving a puckered, ugly scar. The boyish softness in his face began to harden, replaced by the sharp lines of fatigue and unrelenting focus. His conversations with Lux became less about his old world and more about the grim realities of this one. She was his anchor, his quartermaster, and his harshest critic. Theirs was a partnership forged in the shared solitude of the cave, a strange, unspoken alliance between the last scion of Gotham's hope and a refugee from a world of heroes. Finally, he was ready to try again. Not as a hero making an entrance, but as a rumor taking root. His first target was a raider gang known as the Grinners, a particularly vicious crew who marked their territory with crude, smiling faces painted in blood. They were preying on a small community of tunnel dwellers who had access to a clean water aquifer. Izuku spent 2 full nights just observing. He perched on a skeletal communications tower, a silent, black gargoyle, watching their patrols, learning their routines, identifying their leader, a brute with a modified nail gun. He didn't descend like a thunderbolt. He slipped into their camp like a disease. He started with their supplies. A single, well-placed batarang cut the rope holding their stockpile of food, sending it tumbling into a fetid sewer drain. They woke to find their rations gone, their anger and paranoia already simmering. The next night, he targeted their weapons. While they slept, he moved through their makeshift barracks, a whisper of motion in the deepest shadows. He didn't steal the weapons. That would be too obvious. Instead, with the surgical precision of a support course student, he sabotaged them. He removed firing pins, loosened bolts on crossbows, and filled the canisters for their flamethrower with inert, foul-smelling water from the sewer. On the 3rd night, he targeted their minds. He waited until the deadest point of the night, when the wind was at its peak. Using his knowledge of the camp's layout, he moved from shadow to shadow, a phantom they never saw. He took the sentries first. A silent takedown from above, a quick sleeper hold, and the guard would be left bound and gagged in a darkened corner, a batarang pinned to their chest as a calling card. He moved to the leader's tent. The man was asleep, his nail gun on a crate beside him. Izuku didn't touch him. He simply took the weapon. He spent the next hour creating his masterpiece of fear. He strung up the captured sentries from a high gantry, not by their necks, but by their ankles, leaving them to dangle helplessly. He used Black Whip, its shadowy tendrils silent and strong, to hoist the gang's main vehicle, a rusted-out buggy, and leave it suspended precariously over their main campfire. At the camp's entrance, he used the leader's own nail gun to nail his stolen jacket to a post, arranging it to look like a crucified man. His final touch was a whisper. As the first light of dawn began to bleed into the gray sky, he stood on a rooftop overlooking the waking camp. He saw their confusion turn to dawning horror as they discovered his handiwork. He took a single, smooth stone and, with a 1% flick of his finger, sent it skipping across a sheet of corrugated metal. Clang, clang, clang. The sound, sharp and deliberate in the morning quiet, drew every eye. But there was nothing there. Just an empty rooftop. He was already gone. The Grinners didn't fight. There was nothing to fight. They had been dismantled, disarmed, and psychologically broken without a single punch being thrown in open combat. They saw the work of a ghost, a demon with an unseen hand. They saw their leader's weapon used to create a totem of their defeat. They abandoned their territory before the sun was fully up, fleeing a threat they couldn't see or understand. When the tunnel dwellers emerged, they found the raiders gone and a single, sharp-edged bat symbol scratched into the dirt at the edge of the abandoned camp. This became his new method. A pattern of silent, terrifying intervention. He dismantled the traps of a scavenger warlord known as the Wireman, leaving the man tangled in his own snares. He sabotaged the distillery of the Rust Dogs, the gang from Port Mercy, causing their rot-gut liquor to turn into a foul, harmless sludge. He didn't engage them. He didn't denounce himself. He simply appeared, surgically removed their ability to harm others, and vanished, leaving only his symbol and a new, chilling story for them to tell. And the stories began to spread. They were whispers at first, traded over flickering fires in the survivor settlements. Stories of raider gangs found bound and disarmed, their weapons broken, their confidence shattered. Tales of patrols vanishing, only to be found hours later, stripped of their gear and hanging upside down from a bridge, with no memory of how they got there. They didn't have a name for him, not at first. The descriptions were fractured and contradictory. Some said he was a shadow that could walk. Others claimed he was a winged monster, a pre-shattering demon dug up from the city's poison earth. A few, the older survivors who remembered the old tales, began to whisper a forgotten name. The Bat. The myth grew. It twisted and changed with each telling. In the Narrows, they called him the Bat Demon. In the Bowery, the Vengeful Ghost. To the innocent, the frightened, the oppressed, the symbol he left behind became a fragile sigil of hope. It meant that someone was fighting back. It meant they weren't entirely alone in the dark. But to the predators, the warlords, and the killers, the symbol meant something else entirely. It was a promise. An omen. It meant that the shadows now had teeth. It meant that the darkness, once their greatest ally, now belonged to something else. Something that was hunting them. Izuku Midoriya, the boy who wanted to be a symbol of peace, was methodically, painstakingly, becoming Gotham's newest and most terrifying urban legend. Far from the alleys and rooftops where the Bat myth was being born, in the mutated, overgrown heart of what was once Arkham Asylum, a different kind of faith was flourishing. The asylum itself was a ruin, its stone walls choked by thick, thorny vines and strange, phosphorescent fungi that cast the grounds in a perpetual, sickly green twilight. This was the Golgotha Gardens, the seat of power for the man who called himself the Carrion King. He stood on a balcony fashioned from the asylum's shattered bell tower, looking down upon his congregation. They were the flock, a sea of hundreds of ragged, hollow-eyed followers who swayed and chanted in the courtyard below. They were a collection of the lost and the broken, people who had found a purpose not in hope, but in the absolute certainty of fear. The Carrion King was not a brute or a warlord. He was a prophet. He was tall and unnaturally thin, wrapped in layers of sackcloth and scavenged doctors' coats, a macabre parody of a holy man. His face was always hidden behind a horrifying mask pieced together from bird skulls, leather, and stained medical gauze. A single, polished shard of obsidian served as an eyehole, reflecting the world back in a distorted, black mirror. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, and his voice, when he spoke, was a mesmerizing cadence, calm, hypnotic, and utterly terrifying. "Look around you, my flock!" His voice echoed across the courtyard, amplified by the strange acoustics of the ruined architecture. It was a voice that didn't need to shout to command absolute attention. "Look at this broken world. The heroes of the old world, the liars who sold you hope in a bottle, where are they? Their statues are rubble. Their cities are tombs. Their promises turned to dust and poison." He raised a skeletal hand, and the crowd fell silent. "They told you not to be afraid. And that was the greatest lie of all. Fear is not a weakness to be conquered. Fear is the only truth. It is the purity in the rot. It is the clarity in the chaos. Fear is the great teacher, the great cleanser. To feel fear is to feel the universe as it truly is, a cold, hungry, and uncaring void." His power didn't come from guns or muscle. It came from a plant. The thorny, rust-colored vines that choked the asylum were a unique mutation, a terrifying fusion of ivy's research and crane's toxins. They produced a potent, psychoactive pollen. The carrion king had learned to harvest and refine it, creating a fear toxin so powerful it didn't just cause hallucinations. It permanently rewired the brain's chemistry, making the victim addicted to the very terror it induced. His flock wasn't held by loyalty. They were held by a chemical dependency on the sermons that delivered their dose. He was more than a cult leader. He was the sole supplier of the only drug that mattered in his new world order. His sermon was interrupted by the arrival of his chief lieutenant, a hulking man known only as the Scythe. The man's face was a roadmap of scars, and he carried a massive, agricultural scythe strapped to his back, its blade pitted and stained. He knelt before the carrion king, his head bowed. "My king!" the scythe growled, his voice like grinding gravel. The whispers from the outer sectors grow louder. "Another gang has been broken. The Wire Man's territory is quiet." They found his men scattered, their minds addled. They speak of a winged shadow. A bat demon. They found this symbol again. The scythe held up a piece of flat board. Scratched deep into its surface was the unmistakable shape of the bat. The carrion king tilted his head, the obsidian lens of his mask catching the green fungal light. He took the board, running a long, thin finger over the symbol. For a long time, he was silent, the only sound the distant, hypnotic chanting of his flock. "A bat," he finally mused, his voice soft. "How curious! The creature of the night. A symbol of fear." He looked out over his followers, their faces upturned, desperate for his wisdom, for their next taste of holy terror. "For decades I have been the sole shepherd of fear in this city," he said, his voice taking on a new, harder edge. "My truth has been the only truth. Now, a rival faith emerges. An idol of the dark. This heretic uses fear not as a path to enlightenment, but as a crude cudgel. This bat demon seeks to drive the shadows away. I seek to help my flock embrace them, to live within them." He turned back to the scythe. "This is an unacceptable blasphemy. A challenge to our sacred doctrine. The people must not be offered a competing terror. They must not be given a choice in what they fear. There is only one fear. One truth. One king." He held the board out and crushed it in his hand, the cheap material splintering. "Find where this myth is taking root. Find where the desperate are starting to whisper its name instead of mine. We will remind them of the true nature of fear. We will give a sermon that this city will never forget." The scythe bowed his head. "It will be done, my king!" The carrion king looked back at his flock, there chanting a reassuring balm. He saw this new bat not as a physical threat, but as a spiritual one. A rival ideology. And in the wasteland of Gotham, the war for what little remained of humanity's soul would be the most brutal war of all. Izuku knew nothing of the carrion king or his burgeoning faith. His world was the immediate and the tactical. His latest focus was a series of raids on a hydroponics farm hidden in the sublevels of the old Gotham Botanical Gardens. The farm was a vital source of food for several nearby settlements, and the raids were becoming more violent, more desperate. The raiders were a new breed. Unlike the grinners or the rust dogs, they didn't steal to hoard or trade. They took what they could carry and destroyed the rest, burning plants and smashing equipment. It was an act of chaos, not profit. Worse, the few survivors of their attacks were left, changed. They were found babbling in terror, clawing at their own faces, their minds seemingly shattered. Lux, monitoring the chatter, gave him the details. The farmers are calling them the Shriekers. They don't talk, they just make this high-pitched wailing sound. They fight like cornered animals, all claws and teeth. And they always leave the place a wreck. Izuku was perched on a crumbling Art Deco statue overlooking the entrance to the gardens, the cold stone of familiar comfort. It's not logical, he said into his calm, his modulated voice a low rumble. Destroying a food source hurts everyone, including them. It's self-defeating. Maybe logic's not in their vocabulary. Lux's voice crackled back. Be careful. This feels different. He waited. He had learned patience. For hours he remained perfectly still, a part of the gargoyle he sat upon, watching the entrance. Just after what passed for midnight he saw them, a dozen figures, moving with a twitchy, unnerving energy. They slipped into the gardens. Izuku followed, a shadow detaching itself from the stone. He trailed them through the decaying greenhouses, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and rot. Their movements were jerky and unnatural. They communicated in a series of clicks and whistles, and the constant, low wail that gave them their name hummed between them. It was a sound that set his teeth on edge. He watched from the high, steel rafters as they descended into the hydroponics facility. The farmers had set up barricades, but the Shriekers tore through them with a frenzied, inhuman strength. They swarmed the facility, their wails rising to a fever pitch as they began their work of destruction, smashing LED lamps and tearing nutrient tubes from the walls. Izuku needed to understand what was driving them. He dropped silently to the level below, landing behind a large filtration tank. He isolated one of the Shriekers that had separated from the main group, cornering it in a small maintenance corridor. The creature, it was hard to think of it as a person, spun around, its eyes wide and bloodshot, pupils dilated to black pools. A thin, clear fluid trickled from its nose and the corners of its mouth. It hissed at him and lunged, not with a weapon, but with its bare hands, nails sharpened to crude points. Izuku sidestepped, catching the Shrieker's arms. The person was rail-thin under their rags, but they fought with the strength of a man. He didn't strike back. He used a simple joint lock, forcing them to their knees. The Shrieker thrashed and wailed, its eyes darting around the corridor, as if seeing 100 invisible horrors. It wasn't looking at him. It was looking through him. It's like they're trapped in a nightmare, he reported to Lux, his voice low. They aren't fighting me. They're fighting something I can't see. While holding the struggling figure, he noticed something. Tucked into the Shrieker's belt was a small, leather pouch. With his free hand, he pulled it loose. Inside were several dried, thorny seed pods. They were a sickly rust-red color, and a fine, irritating dust puffed out of the bag, making his nose itch even through his cowl's filters. Suddenly, the Shrieker went rigid. A violent tremor racked its body, and it let out a final, agonizing scream before collapsing, unconscious. Lux, Izuku said, his voice urgent. They're not raiders. They're victims. Something is doing this to them. Controlling them. He looked at the strange seed pod in his hand. He had a feeling he was holding the key. As he examined it, he noticed a tiny, thorny vine growing from a crack in the corridor floor. It was the same rust-red color as the pods, and it seemed to thrum with a faint, malevolent energy. It was almost identical to the vines he'd seen choking the buildings all over the city, but this one looked fresher. More alive. The source, he whispered. Whatever this is, the source must be nearby. He left the unconscious Shrieker and followed the trail of vines, a creeping breadcrumb path leading deeper into the labyrinthine sublevels of the gardens. The air grew colder, and a strange, sweet and sour smell, like rotting flowers and chemicals, grew stronger. He emerged into a vast, hidden cavern beneath the gardens. The place was a forest of the rust-colored vines, which pulsed with a soft, internal green light, the same sickly color as the fungi at the Golgotha Gardens. The air was thick with their pollen, and Izuku's cowl filters began to work overtime. In the center of the cavern, a dozen more Shriekers were gathered around a deep fissure in the earth from which the largest of the vines grew. They were tending to it, watering it with a strange chemical slurry from stolen containers. And standing among them, observing their work, was the Scythe. The hulking lieutenant of the Carrion King hadn't noticed him yet. He was focused on the fisher, a look of grim satisfaction on his scarred face. This was a forward operating base. A farm. They weren't just raiding the hydroponics facility for food, they were stealing its chemicals to cultivate their own horrifying crop. Izuku knew he was out of his depth. He was one man against more than a dozen enthralled fanatics and a leader who radiated brutal strength. A direct confrontation would be a repeat of the shipyard, or worse. He retreated back into the shadows of the corridor, his mind racing. He had found his first real clue. A strange, thorny plant. A new, potent toxin. A cult that seemed to be weaponizing it. He had stumbled out of the shadows and onto the edges of a war he didn't even know was being fought. He clutched the seed pod in his gauntlet. The whispers of the bat had spread through Gotham's darkness, and now, the darkness was beginning to whisper back, and its voice was the sound of 1,000 people screaming. The thorny seed pod sat in a sterilized containment unit back in the Batcave, an ugly, rust-colored tumor under the harsh glare of an analysis lamp. For 3 straight cycles, it was the singular focus of Izuku's obsessive mind. He and Lux subjected it to every test the cave's antiquated but functional chemistry lab could offer. The results painted a terrifying picture. "It's a cocktail," Lux said, her tired face illuminated by the green glow of a chemical analyzer's screen. She pushed a stray strand of greasy hair from her eyes, her gaze locked on the scrolling data. "The base compound is a powerful neurotoxin, clearly derived from Jonathan Crane's research. The computer's archives have a partial match. It attacks the amygdala, induces a state of perpetual, heightened terror. I saw its effects on the Shriekers," Izuku murmured, his voice low. He was staring at the pod itself, at the tiny, wicked-looking thorns that dotted its surface. "They were trapped in a waking nightmare. That's the appetizer," Lux continued, pointing a grimy finger at a spike on the data graph. "There's a secondary agent in the pollen. It's a psychoactive alkaloid, highly addictive. It doesn't just create fear, it makes the victim crave it. The initial terror gives way to a euphoric rush when the brain is flooded with adrenaline and endorphins. After a few doses, the user's baseline emotional state becomes so low that they need the fear to feel anything at all. It's a feedback loop from hell." Izuku felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cave's temperature. This wasn't just a weapon, it was an instrument of conversion. A way to enslave people by making them addicted to their own subjugation. The Carrion King wasn't just a cult leader, he was a new kind of drug lord, and his product was fear itself. "There's a third component too," Lux added, her voice dropping. "A mutagen. Unstable. It seems to promote rapid, cancerous cellular growth in plant life. That's what's creating these supervines, but on its own." She trailed off, pulling up a different file, a series of gruesome autopsy photos from Batman's old cases. "It has trace similarities to a compound developed by Pamela Isley. Ivy. She used it to merge plant and animal DNA. In small doses, it makes these vines grow. In large doses, well, I don't think we want to find out." They had the what, but they were missing the who, the where, and the why. The Scythe's presence at the botanical gardens was a single, frustrating clue. The Bat Computer's archives, a priceless relic of a bygone era, were a history book, not a live intelligence network. Its city maps were decades out of date, its knowledge of the current factions limited to what Lux could glean from scavenging radio signals. "The Carrion King, the Scythe, the Golgotha Gardens, these are just names, whispers," Izuku said, turning away from the seed pod to face the massive, dormant central monitor. "I need actionable intelligence, supply routes for the chemicals they're using, the locations of other cultivation sites, the true size of the flock. I'm fighting a shadow, and I can't even see its shape." Lux let out a long, weary sigh. She shut down the analyzer and leaned back in her stool, rubbing her temples. "Yeah, well, the Bat Google is offline. Waynesat got knocked out of the sky during the shattering, and the old man's network of informants, they're all long dead. Information doesn't travel on fiber optic lines anymore, Izuku. It travels in whispers, in trades. It's a commodity, just like clean water and scavenged ammo. So where do we get it?" Izuku pressed, his impatience a sharp edge in his voice. You don't, Lux corrected. You can't. The Bat Demon, the vengeful ghost, your whole myth is built on being an outsider, a phantom. You can't exactly walk into a trader outpost and ask for directions to the local fear cult's headquarters. You'd start a riot or get a knife in your back. She paused, a thoughtful, calculating look entering her eyes. But there is a place. And there is a person. She stood up and walked over to a secondary console, tapping a few keys. A grainy, low-resolution map of a section of the city appeared on the screen. It was a dense, tangled knot of streets and collapsed expressways that had once been known as the Narrows. They call it the Narrows Market now, she explained. It's the closest thing this wasteland has to a neutral zone. Every scavenger, warlord, and survivor with something to trade eventually ends up there. It's run by a council of the oldest traders, and they have one rule: no violence within the market walls. You break the peace, you get thrown to the ferals. It's the one place you can go to get what you need without getting a bullet in the head, usually. Izuku studied the map. It was a tactical nightmare, a maze of choke points and blind alleys. And the person? The market has a central nervous system, Lux said, zooming in on a specific, multi-level structure built into the ruins of an old clock tower. An information broker. The best. They know every deal, every grudge, every secret supply cache from the chemical flats to the harbor. If someone sneezes in the Bowery, they know who sold them the pepper. They go by one name, Cat. The name sparked a flicker of recognition in Izuku's mind. He remembered a file in the Batcomputer's archives, a thick dossier on a master thief, a woman who had walked the line between villain and ally, a constant, complicated presence in Batman's crusade. Selina Kyle. Catwoman. Is it? He started to ask. The original? No. She'd be ancient, if she's even alive. Lux cut him off. This is a new one. A legacy, maybe? Or just someone smart enough to see the value in a good brand name. I don't know much about her. She's careful. She trades in secrets, and her biggest secret is herself. But I know this: if anyone can tell you about the Carrion King's operation, it's her. For a price. Izuku's jaw tightened. He hated this. Relying on an unknown, untrustworthy element. His entire heroic ethos was built on self-reliance and the strength of his trusted friends. Here, he had only Lux, and even she couldn't get him the information he needed. He had to step out of the shadows, not as a symbol of fear, but as a customer. I don't have anything to trade, he said, the problem immediately apparent. Lux gave him a wry, humorless smile. Oh, I think you do. You just don't know it yet. You're the biggest story in the wastes right now. A genuine mystery. To an information broker, first-hand knowledge of the new Bat Demon is a currency more valuable than gold. 2 nights later, Izuku was moving through the skeletal remains of the Narrows. This was a different kind of ruin from the grand, shattered skyscrapers of the city center. Here, the buildings were squashed together, leaning on each other for support like ancient trunks. Makeshift bridges of rope and scrap metal spanned the chasms between tenement buildings, creating a chaotic, three-dimensional city within a city. He was not in costume. At Lux's insistence, he had left the cowl and cape behind. He was dressed in the drab, functional clothes of a scavenger, heavy cargo pants, a patched-up jacket with a high collar, and a hood pulled low over his face to hide his distinct features. A simple breathing mask covered his nose and mouth. He looked like any one of the hundreds of ghosts who haunted these streets. He felt naked. Exposed. Without the suit, he was just a teenager again, his senses screaming at the unseen dangers lurking in every shadowed doorway. He kept his use of one for all to an absolute minimum, a brief, 1% burst to his legs to clear a gap, a flicker of enhanced hearing to catch the echo of footsteps around a blind corner. He was a hero trying to pretend he wasn't there. As he got closer to the market, the oppressive silence of the wastes gave way to a low, steady hum of human activity. The air grew thick with the smell of wood smoke, roasted fungus, and unwashed bodies. He saw more people, their faces illuminated by the orange glow of barrel fires, their eyes wary and watchful. The entrance to the Narrows Market was an archway formed by 2 crashed subway cars. It was flanked by grim-faced guards in mismatched armor, armed with pre-shattering police batons. They didn't challenge him as he walked through, but their eyes followed him, cold and assessing. Inside, the market was a chaotic, vibrant assault on the senses. It was a sprawling, multi-level shantytown built in, on, and around a collapsed section of the monorail system. Strings of salvaged light bulbs, powered by a groaning generator, cast a warm, yellow glow over everything. People of every stripe imaginable crowded the narrow walkways, gaunt tunnel dwellers trading strange, pale mushrooms, burly ironworkers from the metal yards bartering scrap, even a few of the rust dogs he'd encountered, their swagger noticeably absent within the market's walls. This was neutral ground, a fragile truce in a permanent war. Lux's voice crackled softly in the tiny, flesh-colored comm unit hidden in his ear. The clock tower is in the center of the market highest point. Cat's supposed to operate out of the upper levels. Keep your head down. Don't make eye contact. You're just another scavenger looking for a deal. Izuku navigated the crowd, his senses on high alert. He saw things that made his stomach turn. A vendor selling murky water at an exorbitant price. A child no older than 5 picking through a pile of refuse for something to eat. This was the reality of the world he was trying to save, a daily grind of desperate survival that made the battles of heroes and villains seem like a distant, privileged dream. He found the clock tower. It was the market's central pillar, a soot-stained monolith of brick and rusted clockwork. Its face was frozen at 1147. A rickety-looking wooden staircase was built around its exterior, leading up into the darkness. He began to climb. The higher he went, the thinner the crowds became. The air grew quieter, the sounds of the market below fading to a dull roar. He reached a wide landing, the entrance to what had once been the clock's maintenance room. A heavy curtain of patched-together hides served as a door. 2 more guards stood on either side of it, these ones better armed, with wicked-looking harpoon guns. One of them held up a hand, blocking his path. "State your business. I'm here to see the cat," Izuku said, keeping his voice low and even. The guards shared a look. The first one grunted. "Cat sees who she wants, when she wants." "What's your trade?" "Information," Izuku replied. The guard laughed, a short, harsh sound. "Everyone's got information. Most of it's worthless. You got something better? Water? Meds? Ammo? I have something unique," Izuku insisted, his frustration growing. "Heard that before." The guard sneered, resting his hand on the stock of his harpoon gun. "Piss off, kid. We're busy." Izuku knew he couldn't force his way in. That would violate the market's truce and make him an enemy of everyone here. He was about to turn away, to try and formulate a new plan, when a new voice, cool and laced with an amused, feminine authority, drifted through the hide curtain. Now, Milo. Don't be so rude to our guest." The curtain was pushed aside, and a figure stepped out onto the landing. It was a young woman, not much older than him, with a lithe, athletic build that was evident even under her practical, leather and cloth attire. She had short, dark hair, cut in a messy, practical style, and her face was sharp and intelligent, with high cheekbones and a perpetually cynical smirk. But it was her eyes that held him. They were a startling, vibrant green, the color of jade, and they moved with a quick, restless intelligence, taking in everything about him in a single, sweeping glance. Perched on her shoulder, a sleek black cat with equally green eyes watched him with an unnerving, almost human-like focus. "He says he has unique information," the guard, Milo, grumbled. The woman's smirk widened. She walked a slow circle around Izuku, her movements fluid and utterly silent. He felt less like he was being observed and more like he was being appraised, like a piece of meat at a butcher's stall. "He's clean," she said, her voice a low purr. "No visible weapons. Wears his tension in his shoulders. And he's trying very hard to look like he belongs here, which means he absolutely doesn't." She stopped in front of him, tilting her head. The black cat on her shoulder mimicked the movement. "Unique information is my specialty. Let him in." The guards grudgingly stepped aside. The woman gestured for him to enter, her green eyes sparkling with a dangerous curiosity. "Welcome to my parlor," she said. "Try not to break anything." Izuku stepped through the curtain and into the cat's lair. The room was a revelation. While the rest of the city was decaying, this space was alive. It was the command center of a master scavenger, an organized chaos of technology and salvaged comfort. One wall was a bank of flickering monitors, displaying grainy security feeds from all over the market. Maps of the city, marked with grease pencil notes, were tacked to another wall. Shelves overflowed with pre-shattering books, data slates, and strange artifacts. In the center of the room, a small, pot-bellied stove provided a warm, inviting glow. It was a den, a nest built in the heart of the ruin. The woman sank gracefully into a large, worn armchair near the stove, the cat leaping from her shoulder to curl up on her lap. She gestured to a wooden crate opposite her. "Have a seat. Don't mind Ebony. He only bites people I don't like." Izuku remained standing. "Are you the cat?" "I am," she confirmed, stroking the cat's sleek fur. "And you are the mysterious stranger with the unique information. So, let's have it. What secret is so valuable you were willing to risk getting turned into a kebab by my welcoming committee?" Izuku took a breath. This was it. The gamble. He had to give her something valuable enough to earn her cooperation, but not so much that it would compromise his identity. "I know about the Bat Demon," he said. The woman's hand paused in its stroking. Her amused smirk didn't falter, but her eyes sharpened, their green depths suddenly focused and intense. The playful curiosity was gone, replaced by the shrewdness of a predator that has just caught a new, interesting scent on the wind. "Oh," she said softly. "You and everyone else in the Narrows. The stories are the only fresh thing on the menu these days. A big, winged monster that tore up the shipyard, a silent ghost that broke the grinners. The tales get taller every night. I've heard he can fly, that he breathes fire, that he's the angry spirit of Bruce Wayne himself. Most of it is campfire nonsense." "It's not nonsense," Izuku countered. "And it's not a demon." "No? Then what is it?" she asked, leaning forward slightly, her entire posture radiating focused interest. "And what makes your information so much better than the rumors I can pick up for the price of a cup of rotgut?" "Because my information," Izuku said, making his choice, "comes from the source." He slowly reached up and pulled down his breathing mask and hood. He let her see his face, young, earnest, scarred, and utterly out of place in this world of cynical survivors. The cat's smirk finally vanished. She stared at him, her green eyes wide with genuine shock. She saw the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the fierce determination in their depths, and the faint, pale scar on his cheek from a training accident that had happened a universe away. She was an expert at reading people, and the man she had expected, a grizzled killer, a mutated freak, a grizzled veteran, was not the boy standing before her. "Well, I'll be," she whispered, a slow smile returning to her lips, this one genuine and filled with delighted surprise. "The big bad is just a kid." She let out a low laugh. This is much more interesting." Suddenly, before Izuku could react, he felt a sharp, stinging pain in his neck. He slapped a hand to the spot, his fingers coming away with a tiny, feathered dart. His vision swam, the edges of the room blurring. His legs felt like they were made of lead, and a wave of profound drowsiness washed over him. "What?" he slurred, stumbling forward, his body refusing to obey him. The cat was on her feet, the sleeping cat Ebony now on alert, hissing sentinel on the arm of the chair. "Sorry, darling," she said, her voice losing its playful edge, replaced by a cool, professional calm. "Standard security procedure. My information is valuable because I verify my sources, and I have a few questions for you that you'll be much more inclined to answer honestly when you're not entirely in control of your faculties." She caught him as he fell, his weight surprisingly heavy. She grunted with the effort of lowering him onto a pile of furs near the stove. The last thing Izuku saw before his consciousness dissolved into a swirling gray fog was her jade-green eyes looking down at him, filled not with malice, but with an insatiable, dangerous curiosity. He was in her web. His gamble had led him straight into a trap, and as the darkness took him, he could only hope that the spider was in a listening mood. Izuku woke with a splitting headache and the taste of bitter herbs in his mouth. He was lying on the pile of furs, a rough blanket thrown over him. The warm glow of the stove was still there, and the low hum of the market outside was a steady, comforting presence. He sat up, his muscles aching, his mind foggy. The effects of the drug were still lingering. The cat was sitting where he had last seen her, in the armchair, cleaning a long, wicked-looking knife with a piece of oilcloth. Ebony was curled on her lap, purring like a tiny engine. She looked up as he stirred, and a faint smile touched her lips. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she said. "Or afternoon. It's hard to tell down here. The true serum I used is a mild one. Just enough to lower inhibitions. You talk in your sleep, by the way. Something about full cowling and a man named All Might. Izuku's blood ran cold. He had babbled. Given away pieces of his secret. He tried to push himself to his feet, but his body was still clumsy and uncoordinated. "Relax," she said, her voice calm. "Your secrets are safe with me. That's my business, remember? But I have to admit, your story is a strange one. A hero from another world, dropped into our little slice of hell by a quirk accident. It's the most ridiculous, and therefore probably the most truthful, thing I've heard in years." She finished cleaning the knife and set it aside. "You were right about one thing, though. Your information is unique. Very valuable. I need to know about the Carrion King," Izuku said, his voice rough. He pushed himself into a sitting position, forcing the fog from his mind. "Everything you know. His operation, his toxin, his followers, straight to business." "I like that," she said, her expression becoming serious. "The Carrion King. He's the new power in the wastes. Been building his flock for about 2 years. He operates out of the old Arkham Asylum grounds, what he calls his Golgotha Gardens. He's smart. He doesn't rule with guns, he rules with faith. The toxin you found, it's his sacrament. He hooks them with it, doses them during his sermons. He's got hundreds of followers, maybe thousands, all addicted to his brand of fear." She stood up and walked over to the maps on the wall. She tapped a location far to the north, near the industrial chemical flats. "His operation is sophisticated. He uses his followers, the shriekers as you call them, as disposable labor. They scavenge for the precursor chemicals he needs. I've tracked shipments coming from the old Axis Chemicals plant here." She tapped another spot. "And water filtration units being stolen from pumping stations along the river here." She turned back to him, her arms crossed. "He's building something. An empire of the mind. He's not just a warlord carving out territory. He's trying to remake the whole damn city in his image. He's more dangerous than all the other gangs combined, because you can't fight an idea with a bullet." This was it. This was what he needed. A shape for the shadow. A map of his enemy's web. "Why are you telling me this?" Izuku asked, his voice filled with suspicion. "What's your price?" The cat walked back to her chair and picked up the now sleeping Ebony, stroking his fur. "My price is twofold. First, the Carrion King is bad for business. His fanatics disrupt supply lines, they don't trade, and their chaos is unpredictable. It upsets the delicate balance of our little ecosystem. I have a vested interest in seeing his operation dismantled." She looked at him, her green eyes seeming to pierce right through him. "Second, my price is you. Me, you're a new piece on the board, a variable nobody predicted," she explained. "You have power, conviction, and you're dangerously naive. That makes you a fascinating, and potentially useful, asset. I'll be your ears, bat boy. I'll feed you information, point you at the Carrion King's weak spots. I'll help you tear down his church of fear." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "In return you owe me favors. To be determined at a later date. Maybe I'll need a rival trader's warehouse emptied. Maybe I'll need a particularly valuable piece of pre-shattering tech liberated. You'll be my own personal ghost, my private monster to sick on my enemies. We'll have a mutually beneficial partnership." Izuku stared at her. A deal with the devil. An alliance of convenience with a cynical information broker who had drugged and interrogated him. It went against every fiber of his being, but what choice did he have? He was alone, blind, and fighting an enemy he couldn't comprehend. She held the map. He was just the weapon. He thought of the shriekers, their minds broken. He thought of the scythe, and the cold purpose in his eyes. This was bigger than him. He couldn't afford the luxury of his old morality. "I'm not a thief," he said, his voice hard. "I'm not an assassin. I'm not asking you to be. she replied smoothly. I'm just asking you to be the bat. A force of nature that I can, on occasion, point in a useful direction. It's the best deal you're going to get in the city. He looked around the cozy, cluttered room, a tiny island of stability in a sea of chaos. He looked at the strange, sharp, and undeniably brilliant woman who had built it. A reluctant alliance, a tense partnership. It was a compromise, a step into the gray morality of this world that he knew he might never be able to step back from. Slowly he stood up, his body now his own again. He met her gaze, his own eyes filled with a grim, weary resolve. Fine, he said. You have a deal. The cat smiled, a genuine, triumphant smile that lit up her whole face. Excellent. I do so love it when a plan comes together. She extended a hand. Now, since we're going to be partners, you can call me Cat. Izuka looked at her offered hand, then back at her face. He didn't take it. Partnerships in his world were built on trust and friendship. This was something else entirely. This was a contract. Just get me the information, he said, turning and heading for the hide curtain, leaving her standing there, her hands still extended in the warm, flickering light of her den. He had what he came for, but he knew, with a sinking certainty, that he had paid a much higher price than he yet understood.